Hello, everybody, and welcome. I hope that you had a fantastic Thanksgiving and a great time filled with lots of love and laughter in your household. We have got for you a very special program planned today. This is highly demanded. We have listeners across the board that have asked us to put together a comprehensive episode that is all theater of the minds. And these are some of the most popular and most requested episodes of Theater of the Mind over the last 2 years of doing the show. So we hope that you enjoy it. So as a special little holiday gift from Tim and I, please sit back, turn down the lights, turn up your radio, and enjoy today's Theater of the Minds.
This week's Theater of the Mind revisits history. I Remember the Day, a true life encounter from Jared Benson. Dallas was abuzz with excitement. The president, our president, was in Texas for a visit. There was huge fanfare, excitement, and a parade-like atmosphere. To say our family were Kennedy supporters was a bit of an understatement. We were fervent servants. My Aunt Evelyn was among the biggest of all. Aunt Evie, as we called her, prattled on and on about JFK like he were her own son. I think she may have rivaled even Joe and Rose in the pride department when it came to Jack, as she called him. It was November of 1963. On this day, our family was knocked out of commission with what I think could only be akin to a version of the Black Plague. We were all down and out, sick, fevery, achy. It was horrible. Other than that, it was just another day in Dallas. We had congregated in a small breakfast nook in our home to partake in my mother's soup, trying to find resiliency in the ultimate of comfort food. The grandfather clock in the hall rang out with a powerful single bong to mark the time. It was 12:30. A few minutes later, the phone rang. Mom stood up, shuffled across the kitchen floor, and grabbed the receiver of our lime green home phone hanging on the wall.
Benson residence,
she chirped. Immediately, her expression changed.
I'm sorry, who is this? Who? Evie? What are you saying?
With that statement, we all turned to look at Mom. I don't think anyone breathed the entire time she held the phone.
Who was shot? Who's dead? When? Oh my Lord, what? How is this possible? How is this possible?
She cried out in astonishment and tormented pain. My father stepped up and approached my mother. "For God's sakes, Margaret, who is that? What's going on?" he barked out. With that, Mom turned to him. Her eyes rolled straight back up in her head, and the phone slipped from her hand, striking the floor. Just moments before she did, she fell to the ground in a heap. We all leaped up and ran to her. My father was already cradling her, stroking her face, trying to rouse her back to consciousness. I reached for the phone to see what was going on and who was there, and I was met with an annoying, shrill sound, the screeching that phones made in that day when they were left off the hook. I stood up and replaced the phone on the silver hook and turned my attention to my parents. My mom was coming to at this point and shaking quite badly.
Bob, it was Evie. She said Kennedy had been shot. He's dead. It was Evie, Bob. It was Evie.
Dad tried to calm her. "That can't be right, Marge. She's in a coma. The stroke. The stroke, honey. She had a stroke," he said, almost trying to convince himself. I snapped on the TV and we waited with anticipation as the TV crackled to life. I checked the stations, but there was no mention of Kennedy, a shooting, or anything of its kind. "It was some jackass kid pulling a prank," Dad assured Mom.
No, Bob. It was Evie,
she sobbed. Dad called the hospital and checked on Aunt Evie. She was there, still very much in a coma and unresponsive. Dad was reminded of our appointment with the doctors the following day to make a very hard decision. The rest of our day was uneventful, and Mom eventually calmed down. The following morning, as a family, we went to say goodbye to Aunt Evie. The stroke was extensive, and she was completely unresponsive and living only with the aid of machines. It was November 22nd in Dallas. We sat in the room, taking turn holding Aunt Evie's hands, saying our goodbyes and sharing fond memories and our fair share of tears. When suddenly, the hospital sprang to life. There were cries from down the hall. Doctors and nurses filled the rooms. All eyes were on the TV. It was about 12:40 p.m., and news was being reported that JFK had been shot and was in transit to the hospital. We exchanged baffled looks, our mouths hung open in pure confusion. It was exactly 24 hours since we received that call from Aunt Evie. My comatose aunt, the one that didn't have a phone in her room, that called to tell us Kennedy had been shot and was dead. One day before it happened. Like the rest of the world, we sat transfixed to the TV, KRLD in Dallas, watching the story unfold before our very eyes. We were aghast as the sound of police sirens screamed outside the hospital. They were bringing the president here, to Parkland Memorial, where Aunt Evie lay in a comatose state.
This is Walter Cronkite in our newsroom, and there has been an attempt, as perhaps you know now, on the life of President Kennedy. He was wounded in an automobile driving from Dallas Airport into downtown Dallas, along with Governor Connolly of Texas. They've been taken to Parkland Hospital there, where their condition is as yet unknown. We have not been told their condition. At Dallas, in the downtown hotel room, a group had been gathered to hear President Kennedy when he was waiting his arrival. Let's switch down there now, where Eddie Barker of KRLD is on the air.
As you can imagine, there are many stories that are coming in now as to the actual condition of the president. One is that he is dead. This cannot be confirmed. Another is that Governor Connolly is in the operating room. This we have not confirmed. The president was whisked from the scene of the attempted assassination or assassination, depending upon his condition, of course, at this hour, by bus to Parkland Hospital, and the president undoubtedly is in the emergency room at that hospital, which would be on the first floor of Parkland. No word is yet. We are awaiting something more official. It is, of course, difficult, certainly, to go on scanty reports.
Within 30 minutes of arriving, Aunt Evie let out a gurgling sob, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. Then she slipped away. Our attention turned back to the television set and newscaster Walter Cronkite.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
That day in Dallas, Texas, we lost a true American, someone that stood for all the things that are good and right in the world. Love, family, and commitment to our country. Oh yeah, we lost our president too. I will never forget where I was that day, or the day before Kennedy was killed. Battle of Bigfoot. A personal encounter shared by a listener that wishes to remain anonymous. I awoke with a start. The normal tranquil silence that I enjoyed at my hunting cabin was shattered with a sound that still haunts me to this day. It sounded like a large bear and something else fighting for its life somewhere off in the distance. I sprang out of bed, my room barely lit with the soft, muted colors of early morning, threw on my pants, quickly slipped my feet into my boots, and without lacing them, I grabbed my shotgun and headed outside to see what all the commotion was. I had been visiting this cabin in these woods for years and had never heard something like this before. I ran towards the sound of the attack, the sounds of twigs and branches snapping as I made my way through the woods, huffing and puffing. I was quickly reminded how out of shape I had gotten. Then, there opened a small clearing ahead, and what I saw was unimaginable. I refused to even tell my friends this story because I know how insane it sounds, but I also know what I saw that day. Locked in mortal battle was one of the largest black bears I'd ever seen, and it was being mauled by something even larger, something horrifying. There was a battle royale unfolding before my unbelieving eyes. A black bear and Bigfoot entrenched in a knockdown, drag-em-out fight to the finish. The sound at this point was deafening. The bear's growls and howls reached epic proportions. The beast it grappled with, howling and grunting so loud as it tried to keep its arms and hands clear of the bear's angry jaws. I wondered what would cause this to happen, and I saw my answer. Not 10 feet away from me, a small bear cub cowering as its mother fought valiantly to protect her child. The Bigfoot creature must have caught them by surprise and come between mama and baby, prompting an all-out war. I watched in utter horror. It was like every B-grade movie I watched growing up. This would be the closest to King Kong vs. Godzilla I would ever witness in person. The bear howled as it struggled against Bigfoot's grasp. The giant creature opened its mouth and clamped down on the bear's neck as it held the bear from behind. The bear cried out in agony as the Sasquatch struggled to keep the upper hand on its foe. In a surprise move, the bear threw itself forward into an awkward somersault which sent the behemoth behind him flying forward as smashing to the ground with a thunderous crash. The bear took advantage of the stunned adversary and sprung into action, leaping on the head and shoulders of Bigfoot and its entire 800-pound frame, growling this strange, sustained, burping Wookiee noise. It pounced repeatedly up and down on the Sasquatch, looking like it was trying to break its back. The creature bellowed again in agonizing pain and pushed hard against the ground to try to right itself between pounces from one ornery, smoky bear. Then, the worst possible thing happened. The baby bear let out a series of cries, and Mama stopped her attack and turned. That's when she saw me. Within 10 feet of her bear cub, she lowered her head and began to charge. I lifted my shotgun and fired a round into the sky with the hopes that this would scare Mama and baby off. The bear was not deterred and kept its rampage towards my direction. That's when the Bigfoot sprang up and jumped on the back of the moving bear and with all its might pulled back on the beast's head. And then I heard a sickening, muted crack, like a large wet limb from a tree popping, and the bear collapsed. I was still a good 40 yards or so away as I watched the Bigfoot rain down hammering blows to the back of the bear to finish it off. I slowly backed up and watched in amazement. The little bear let out with a whelping noise, and the Sasquatch turned its attention to our direction. And it looked mad. Well, that's all I had to see. I took off running back to the cabin as fast as I could, wishing I would have laced the damn boots I was wearing, especially as I tried to hurdle some debris of logs and branches, and the loopy laces caught one and sent me crashing to the ground. I literally ran out of my boots in pursuit of safety. I got in, slammed the door, and locked it. I could hear the cries and screams of the young cub as it met its untimely demise at the hands of a very irritable Bigfoot. I stayed in my cabin the rest of the day and decided it was safer to stay inside. Then, I planned to venture back out the next day. I would plan a return to the site of the battlegrounds and take some pictures as I knew my friends would never believe me without them. That night, I barely slept, as I kept hearing the sound of loud thumping and grunting from outside. At one point, I heard glass shattering, followed by loud whoops and bellows. When morning finally broke, I peeked out of the cabin window to see my car, and it was in rough shape. Something had been pounding huge dents into the hood and roof and thrown a massive rock through my windshield. I decided against returning to the spot I saw the fight take place and reevaluated the fact that maybe that was Bigfoot territory, and the bears entered his space, and that may be what led to the attack. All I know is this thing did not want me there either, so I loaded up the car, and I got the hell out of there. It's been about 5 years now. I never returned, but I do look online to see if there have been any Bigfoot encounters in the area. There have been a few reported sightings, mostly fleeting, but nothing like what I witnessed. I often lay awake replaying the events of that early morning and realized just how lucky I was to have not been the original target of a rampaging Bigfoot, and utterly frightened and in awe of the raw power it displayed in wrestling and killing an 8-foot, 800-pound black bear. The Implant. The true story of Harold Tucker. I live in a cabin in the woods in the Pacific Northwest and have always and always will be an outdoorsman. I've read everything I could find on encounters with Bigfoot in our region and spoken to many of the old-timers that have claimed to have had run-ins with the big fella. You would think, with all the time I spend outdoors, I would have accidentally bumped into the guy by now. Well, I have never had any encounters with ghosts, Bigfoot, or anything to do with what people refer to as the paranormal. Not for lack of trying, just didn't seem to be a part of my experience in this lifetime. Well, that changed in 1998. I was settled in for the night, a Saturday as I recall. I'd spent the better part of the day outside chopping wood, cutting branches, and clearing some dead trees from my property, trying to clear a nice patch of sky out around my home so on beautiful nights I could enjoy a fire and cast my gaze into the wonder of the starry skies that wrap themselves so lovingly around this part of the country. Deep, rich black skies sprinkled with twinkling wonder from faraway galaxies as far as the eye could see. I sat quietly, sipping some coffee, comforted by the crackling of the fire burning bright in my yard, my eyes focused into the night sky, breathing in the cool, crisp air, when I heard what sounded like someone or something walking around behind me in the woods. I turned slowly in my chair and waited for my eyes to adjust to the light difference, and then I let out with a bellow. "Go on! Get on out of here! Go!" I figured it would spook off whatever woodland creature was drawn to the charismatic light flickering through the heavily wooded area surrounding my house. I then saw what looked to be a few small outlines of kids running between the trees. I was put off, and it was 9:30 at night, so not entirely too late for kids to be up, but it seemed much too late and dangerous to be screwing around in the woods without flashlights. I wasn't too concerned about being jumped, as I could tell by their size. They were more than likely the 10 and 12-year-old that lived up the road from me. "Hey, it's kind of late for you kids to be jerking around out here in the dark. Better get your butts home before I call your parents," I commanded. Well, with that, I could hear the two scramble off to God knows where. I was once again enveloped in the sounds of the woods. An owl hooted high from a tree perch, the fire crackling with the normal pops and hisses. But my two onlookers had fled. After another 30 minutes or so, I doused the fire with a bucket of water I kept on hand for just this purpose. I stomped on the still glowing embers to ensure the fire was safely out before retreating to the comfort of my home. Once inside, I closed the heavily wooded door. I snapped the lock into place and slid the bolt lock to secure the door. I washed up, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed. I wasn't there for more than about 5 to 10 minutes when I noticed lights, like large flashlight beams bouncing around outside my windows, casting bizarre shadows across my room. Now, this continued for another 15 minutes or so, and I thought, well, enough is enough. These little brats need to go home. Then, I heard the sudden and alarming bang from my front door. Like something heavy and with purpose struck the door once. Then it came again, this time 3 hard crashes. Bang! 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 I stood up and I crossed the floor to my bedroom door, made my way across the living room, and waited to hear who or what was going on outside. Who's there?" I yelled. "You damn kids better go home, or I'm going to be calling your parents." Then, to my surprise, another 2 bangs shook the door. Bang! Bang! I stepped back in a state of confusion and shock. I was trying to figure out my next move when I saw the doorknob begin to jiggle, and with utter amazement, watched the small handle lock slowly turn itself to the unlocked position. Then the door rattled in its frame as something pushed against the door again. I was baffled as how they had unlocked the door. Then remembered the extra key I kept under the milk can on my front porch. Stupid. That's what I thought to myself. I have to hide that damn thing better. Then my heart stopped as I stood there, watching as the bolt lock on the inside began to slide to the unlocked position. I recall thinking through how they unlocked the handle with the extra key, but this made no sense. The doorknob began to turn, and I stood there frozen, unsure whether to run or stand my ground. The handle popped, and the door was ready to be open. Then there was silence. A silence I did not like at all. I readied myself to run at the intruder to take them off guard when they opened the door. Then all at once it happened. The door swung wide open, and my room was filled with a bright light and a very loud crackling noise. Then I felt something hit me, and everything went black as I fell to the floor. I awoke a few hours later, stiff and sore, and presumably in the same fashion I had fallen unconscious, crumpled in a heap on the floor. To my surprise, the door was closed, the handle was locked, and the latch was again closed from the inside. Now, I did a quick scan of my home, walking room to room, lighting each room up as I entered them, and found no one there and nothing out of place. I couldn't begin to even comprehend how this happened. That's when I reached up and rubbed my aching head, and I found a strange bump. I headed to the bathroom to assess the damage and found a raised bump on my forehead above my left eyebrow. I reached up to poke at it with my finger just to measure the wound, and as my finger approached it, the damn thing moved. I must have hit myself really good. I swore I saw the bump move slightly to avoid my prodding. What in the hell? I tried again, and it shifted back to its original spot. I finally outsmarted the bump and placed fingers on each side like I was preparing to pop a zit, and I felt a vibration under the skin. Something hard, something was right there. It felt thick, like a long-grained piece of rice. I squeezed, and it buzzed, and my head began sweating like I was on fire. The vibration was harsh, and I continued to squeeze harder. Then something long and dark began to emerge from the middle of the bump. I grabbed the tweezers off the bathroom sink and quickly clamped down on it. I gave a short, hard pull, and it burst out of the bump in my forehead, and I was sent quickly down to my knees. The pain was unreal, searing, throbbing from the lump on my head, and I heard this loud, ear-piercing squeal fill the air. I slammed my hands to my ears to cut off the sound, and it finally subsided. I searched the ground near the tweezers for whatever had popped out. I searched and searched. I eventually grabbed my vacuum cleaner, popped in a fresh bag, and slowly, methodically began sweeping the floor with it, waiting to hear something or to investigate the bag after a full cleaning. Then I heard the ping, like a bobby pin being grabbed by the vacuum. Ah, success. Then the vacuum let out a horrendous grinding noise and stopped. I flicked the switch, turned it off, fearful that I was going to burn the motor out. I turned the machine to its side and sought the culprit causing the noise. There it was, lodged in the roller like a metal thorn. I gave it a yank and was surprised to feel it vibrating between my fingers. I grabbed a pill bottle out of my medicine cabinet and poured the pills onto the counter. I crammed the item into the bottle and screwed the top back into place. Then I gave the container a shake, and I could see it bounce around inside the plastic prison I had sent it to. My head was killing me. My body was sore, and I swallowed a handful of aspirin and climbed into bed to ride this headache out. I placed the container on the bedstand and fell quickly to sleep. When I woke in the morning, I sat up in wonder. Had I dreamt it all? My hand moving over my forehead to find the small knot still there and tender to the touch. Well, I thought, at least I got that part right. I turned to the place I had placed the bottle with the offending item in it, and it was missing. I looked everywhere, and after a few hours of confounded feelings, I decided to hop in the car to go to town to see the doc and get myself checked. When I opened the door and crossed the porch, I found the pill bottle that I had used to contain the implant laying there, discarded. The top was off and thrown 2 feet further. I snapped the bottle up, and it was empty. I dropped to my knees and looked everywhere, and it was nowhere to be found. I have no idea what the hell happened to me that night. I never saw the lights or the childlike beings again anywhere near my property. It wasn't until months later, when sitting at a local dive bar with some regulars, that I heard the conversation about the night a few months ago that they had seen strange lights in the sky. They began to describe the area, and it was right near my property. They described large triangle craft that from time to time would emit light beams, large bright light beams, straight down to the ground. Then after a bit, they just seemed to take off, and they've never been seen again. The Mantis Encounter of Hawaii, a story shared by Bill Murphy, formerly of the hit TV sci-fi channel series Fact or Fake: The Paranormal Files. I would like to share with you an unusual encounter I had in 2007 that occurred on the Big Island of Hawaii. I booked a week at a resort called Kalani, which is a beautiful slice of paradise, where I met another 50 to 60 people who were there for a metaphysical retreat. I was drawn to the conference since I was using electroencephalograms for several years to measure the difference in brainwave frequencies of people who claim to have an expanded awareness, including developing a sixth sense after intense meditation. Now, since there was a series of classes offered throughout the conference that involved meditation, I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn some of the techniques used to quiet the mind, and perhaps have access to willing test subjects for my own research. However, after preparing for this adventure, I decided to throw myself into the experience and leave my cumbersome EEG home, as it was clear to me this wouldn't be a journey to obtain data. Instead, this would be an opportunity to participate in what had been practiced for thousands of years, long before people relied on technology to validate their claims. The weather was blustery and unstable when I arrived, and the mist from the sea, coupled with high winds, added to the excitement. I liked the atmosphere, but the driver of the van that picked us up from the airport seemed slightly nervous. As we entered the resort and I could see people were trying to secure canopies and tents throughout the grounds, I had rented a bungalow which had 2 solid walls and 2 exterior walls built of screens with floor-to-ceiling blinds. I liked the space a lot. The large, fearless lizards were crawling across the screens and staring back at me. The humid breeze flooded the entire bungalow, and even when the rain came and went on that first night, I didn't mind at all when the interior became damp. Being totally connected with nature, I was looking forward to whatever the organizers of the event had planned. I tossed my suitcase on the floor, and as dusk came, I headed to the center of the grounds, where a huge campfire was illuminating the lush greenery and people's faces. With sparks flying up and flickering flames casting shadows everywhere, people's faces were shifting, as only the light from a fire can create. We were all moths being drawn to the flames, and everyone was greeting each other while scanning their surroundings, knowing we all were going to be a part of something special. It felt mysterious, maybe even slightly dangerous, with the burning logs snapping and the flames crackling. Eventually, everyone melted away into the night, heading to their tents and lodges. The next morning, the blowing of the conch signaled the first meal of the day was being served. A superb menu was posted in the outdoor cafeteria, and an assortment of Hawaiian cuisine was offered. It was all healthy and very satisfying. Several rows of long tables ensured you would be breaking bread with people you hadn't known before, but would seem like old friends by the end of the meal. The organizers pointed to the signs posted with various classes and workshops, and I signed up for several during the days and nights throughout the week. One class was titled Portal Building, and 8 of us added our names to the roster. For the first few days, I attended large workshops and some of the smaller classes when I learned basic meditation methods. There is an unexpected surprise when you become mindful or conscious of the moment you are in. What begins as quiet introspection ends with a sudden rush of information about your surroundings near and far. It's the complete opposite of being attention deficit, and my ability to see and hear everything drastically improved as I worked to quiet my own inner voice. During the times I was not in a scheduled class, I explored Kalani. I could hear the waves hitting the ever-changing coastline of the island, and I ventured into an overgrown area where I found a trail leading to the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The volcanic basalt creates beautiful black beaches and cliffs, topped with green vegetation. I found a large swing, easily wide enough for 2 people, and swung on it despite the fact I seemed to go slightly past the cliff with at least an 80-foot drop to the sea. After I had my fill, I stopped the swing and looked at the painting on it. I believe it said, "This magical place," and other words I couldn't decipher. I then heard the not-too-distant sounds of bongo drums. I ambled toward the drum beats and found 2 people. One was teaching the other to drum with several different percussion instruments. It was an instructor from Kalani, and I signed up for an hour-long spontaneous class on tribal drumming. It was all so perfect, and just what I had hoped Hawaii would be like. During all of this, there were the shifting winds and the constant mist that never seemed to be a bother at all, even when the tropical rain would suddenly drench everything. After several days, the evening of the portal building class had arrived. Those that signed up met at the designated sculpture in the center of the retreat, and we were led to a sweat lodge in a slightly secluded area. It is a low, round structure built with volcanic rocks that is open on 2 sides, but you have to duck to enter, and it's best to sit once inside. There was no electricity, and we needed flashlights to see. Once everyone was comfortable, our session began with ohms, which is a type of chant that has a synchronizing effect on a group of people. This falls into a natural rhythm followed by silence, and then more ohms, etc. Now, some people open and close their eyes intermittently, but the effect is very calming. After nearly 40 minutes of this, several of us slightly opened our eyes, but not saying a word. I realized those with their eyes open, including myself, were looking at the section of the curved wall that had the same simple black cloth that is used to cover the two openings. At first, it seemed to look like fireflies had entered the sweat lodge, as it looked like tiny twinkling lights. But then they began to swirl in a rotating pattern that started to speed up and take on a purple hue. The swirling lights deepened in color, and the circular pattern enlarged, with another triangular shape forming in the center. It was then that the image began to become clear. The shape I was seeing was that of a mantis head, but it was made of the same purple light. Although it was now clearly defined, it appeared to be approximately 18 inches across, and parts of the large upright body were also visible. The head moved from side to side, scanning all 8 of us. Within minutes, it faded away. No one said a word the whole time until someone whispered, "Perhaps we should exit the sweat lodge." We all scrambled without hesitation and stood outside of the structure, looking at each other, waiting for anyone to speak. Finally, one person asked, "What was that?" I believe none of us wanted to admit what we saw because each of us had no way of knowing what the others had seen, if anything. Another person finally said she thought she saw what looked like a giant insect. "Yes!" several of us blurted out. But as it turned out, this giant purple mantis that poked its scary head out of a swirling vortex was seen by 5 of the 8 that were there. Those that saw it didn't feel threatened, but this type of sighting was not your average occurrence, which made it frightening. Although I have had an interest in studying enduring mysteries for many years, I was not familiar with creatures like this before, but have since read about others who have seen what many people call the mantis head aliens. I don't know if they're extraterrestrial, interdimensional, a shared ancient memory, or perhaps hallucinations of some sort. What I can say is that this conference was about healthy living, with 3 square meals a day, proper rest and exercise, and expanding the mind using centuries-old natural techniques. I did go back to the sweat lodge the next day to examine it thoroughly, looking closely at the rocks and black cloths while taking several photographs. There was absolutely nothing unusual about any of it. I'll never forget that portal building class I participated in with those other people, and the mantis head that we experienced in Hawaii. The 5 of us saw the giant mantis. We're all now bonded in a way that only a life-changing experience like this can accomplish. The weather had become very calm as I left the island, but you never really leave Hawaii. A piece of you always remains, calling you back.
We hope you're enjoying today's special presentation of Beyond the Darkness, Theater of the Mind, all of our favorite and bizarre stories collected in one long episode just for you.
Being a fan of ghost hunting shows and wishing I could have my own experience, I was lured by the temptation of buying a so-called haunted item. So of course I immediately went to the most credible site I could find for such things, eBay. I searched for months looking for just the right item. I didn't want something big and gaudy, and all the ghost-infested dolls that popped up just looked the same. Some form of old-looking female doll in old clothes. Always the same look, the same vibe, and nothing I really wanted to take a chance on. Until one day, as I was scrolling through the choices, a figure popped up that caught my attention. It was an old, carved ventriloquist dummy. A creepy-looking figure, something straight out of a horror movie, so I was hooked. I read the tale. This dummy was reportedly used as a vessel during occult rituals to move energy forms from one physical form to another. Immediately I thought, this joker has seen one too many Child's Play movies, but it supposedly had voices manifesting from it, strange smells that would appear and disappear, and more otherworldly phenomena, so I decided, what the hell. At least it wasn't the same old-looking dolls with the same lame stories I had read before, and it was freaky enough looking that I would effectively weird out any of my friends that came to visit, and it would be a conversation starter, that was a sure bet. After I won the creepy creation, I received 2 very bizarre emails from the seller, both wondering if I wanted to back out of the transaction. They were feeling guilty passing this on to me. They had bought it at some strange thrift shop in San Francisco and had been told the story of the figure but never bought into it. They just liked the look of this detailed old mannequin. But, without going into detail, said it was the biggest mistake they had ever made. I assured them, listen, you did your job, you sold me, you can stop with the overkill. Well, 7 days later, a large package was delivered to my door. I was very excited and had been bragging up my purchase for days to coworkers and friends, mostly trying to solicit some kind of reaction. Most of my friends and coworkers just rolled their eyes and told me I was a sucker. I opened the box and was astonished to see that the figure was much larger than I thought from the pictures. I assumed it would be a couple feet tall. This thing was nearly 4.5 feet tall and so much more creepy looking in person. It was beautifully crafted, but I wondered why they would make something so damn freaky looking. Now, imagine the weirdest dummy you've ever seen, multiply it by 100. If the craftsman was going for creepy, he achieved it. Picture Annabelle from the Conjuring movie, only ugly, scarier, and her brother. Now, I proudly displayed my purchase on the entertainment center in my living room right next to my TV, and then I waited, patiently. But after 3 weeks, nothing. Damn, I'd been fooled right out of $265, and the kicker was the previous owner gave me 2 chances to back out, and I was too stupid to take him up on it. I grew tired of looking at his menacing devil-like appearance and smile staring at me, mocking me, so I threw him in my guest bedroom and scolded the ugly thing, saying, "Yeah, some big bad demon vessel you turned out to be. You're just $265 worth of ugly." Then I slammed the door and headed off to bed. Now, as you can guess, things changed in my place real quick. I don't know if it was my stern chastising or locking it away that pissed it off, but suddenly it was in the mood to play, and it meant business. I woke up that first night to what sounded like a barroom brawl had broken out in my guest bedroom. Bangs, muffled shouts, and something heavy pounding the walls. I lay there trying to convince myself this was a dream or that I was hearing something from my neighbors upstairs. Finally, I got the courage up to go to the guest room, after turning every light on in the place, of course. Then I threw open the door. There, sitting totally upright on the bed, was the dummy. Nothing in the room was disturbed, nothing broken, but the way it sat straight up with its head tilted downward, slightly giving the menacing appearance that it was scowling at me from under its unhappy brow. That's what creeped me to the core. I, of course, did what any rational human would do and yelled, "Well, F you," at the ugly thing and finished by saying, "Knock it off, I'm trying to sleep." Then I turned in a huff and slammed the door. When the door slammed, I was caught off guard by what sounded like a deep voice barked back, "No, F you." I don't think I slept a wink that rest of the night, and I left every light in the place on for the remainder of the evening. I was sure what had happened, and what I had heard had to have come from upstairs, and I was half awake and half asleep, so I must have just been imagining what I heard. Well, eventually, sunlight broke and filled my apartment. I hopped in the shower, and when I turned my back to the stream of hot water, my back seized in pain, like someone had just dragged one of those 3-pronged garden tools down my back, hard and fast. At first, I thought it was hotter than usual water, until I saw the drops of blood hitting the floor of the shower. When I got out and looked in the mirror, it looked like someone carved a damn tic-tac-toe board on my back, and a few of the deeper scratches were trickling blood. I was officially freaked, hurried my morning ritual up, and got the hell out of there. When I got to work, I started telling my coworkers what had happened, and had a mix of gasps and eye rolls sent my way. Then, my cell lit up. I was getting a call. From home. Seriously, what the? Was I losing my mind? I answered and said, "Who the hell is this and how did you get into my apartment?" There was nothing, just a background hum and static. Then it disconnected. I showed my coworkers and suddenly everyone was as shocked as I was. A bit later, my cell began to vibrate again. I looked down and was relieved that the call was not coming from my home until I answered it. It was the apartment manager, and they were calling to let me know they were in my apartment with the police. A neighbor reported what sounded like female voices screaming from inside and lots of banging noises. They had found nothing when they entered, and nothing was amiss. but they thought I should know that if I had left a TV on a timer or something, I shouldn't do that anymore. What was I going to say? No TV on a timer, just a demon-infested dummy in my guest room. I left for home that day terrified of what might be waiting for me when I got in. I checked to make sure nothing was broken and decided to confront my unhappy houseguest. I opened the door, and he was nowhere to be seen. The bed was empty. The room was empty. The closet was empty. And then I heard what can only be described as a chilling, slow laugh come from behind me. I turned. Nothing was there. Then it came again. I realized it was coming from under the goddamn bed. Oh, hell no. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed my broom, and came back into the room. Laid on the ground and began digging under the bed with the broom handle to try and push the frickin' thing out. I had no clue what I was going to do once I got it out from under the bed, but I sure as hell was not going to bend down, get close, and look. I've seen far too many horror movies and knew this thing would just grab me or something equally terrifying. No matter how I batted at the thing, it would not come out from under the bed. Then it let out with a childlike voice saying, "Let's play." I dropped the broom, stood up, walked out of the room like a boss. Hell no, part 2. Now, I was really frantic. I decided this was going to end right now before I lost my mind. Years of Supernatural flooded my memories, and I thought, get the rock salt. I grabbed my old suitcase from the front closet, took off to a metaphysical shop, and asked for a bucket of rock salt. The girl behind the counter started laughing and said, "Okay, did Sam or Dean send you?" We both shared a laugh, and I told her what had happened. She went to work gathering stuff from every corner of the shop. Rock salt, sage, Florida water, and this long red rope that she said was for binding. She quickly informed me of what needed to be done and how to do it, so I took my collection of odds and ends and headed home, remembering the final words she said, "Do not show fear." Oh, I was ready to do battle. I got home, stood before the door of the guest room with steely determination and reached for the knob. Then the knob moved on its own, and just before my hand had grasped it, it rattled back and forth. I knew it was trying to screw with me and get the upper hand, so I put my hand on the knob and triumphantly yelled out, "You gotta go, my man!" The door popped open. Nothing had changed. The broom handle was still under the bed where I laid it, and the doll was nowhere in sight. I gave the room a quick once-over again, just to make sure that when I was down trying to fish this thing out from under the bed, it wouldn't jump out of a closet and drag me to some parallel universe. The doll was nowhere to be found, which meant the little prick was still hiding underneath my bed. I got down, thrust my hands under the bed, grabbing for it, and when my hands bumped it, I swear it moved to try to get away. I held on for all I was worth, dragged the son of a bitch out, and quickly started wrapping the red rope around the figure, binding its arms to its body and legs together, when I felt something bite me, and a muffled laugh came out of it. I channeled my strong inner black woman. For the record, I'm a white boy with red hair. I channeled that strong inner black woman and yelled out, "Oh no, you didn't!" I threw him into the open and waiting suitcase, poured the rock salt on him, read the prayer of St. Michael, and slammed the suitcase shut, latching it. Then I lit the sage stick and started waving it around the room and under the bed to clear the space. I dragged the suitcase out to my car, threw it in the trunk, drove as fast as I could to the bridge in town, all the while hearing something screaming, a muffled, angry scream. When I got to the bridge, I jumped out and ceremoniously threw it as far as I could out to the waiting water below. The girl in the shop said to do so because this would keep it bound and me protected from what was inside. Something to do with the rope, the salt, and running water. I didn't care enough about the science of it. I just wanted the end result. I wanted this freak fest over. The suitcase hit the water, and damn it, it floated. Now what? Truthfully, I didn't care. I jumped my frightened ass back in the car and took off like a bat out of hell, secure in the fact that I was rid of my possessed pal once and for all. I can't tell you the kind of relief I felt driving home. Happy as hell to be rid of it. Somewhat guilty feeling, I've got to be honest, that someone else might find it, but it was gone. Gone out of my life, and that was all that mattered. I pulled into my parking spot and felt my phone vibrate. I pulled it out of my pocket and felt the overwhelming wave of defeat pound me. Because the call was coming from inside my apartment. The Demon Doll of Denver. The True Life Account by Linda Dawson. In the summer of 1977, a small house on the outskirts of our town burned to the ground, killing a little girl, her mother, and father. The only survivor was the brother, a boy just a few years older than me. It was a sad time and on the tips of everyone's tongues for months to come. The brother explained that his little sister had an unhealthy fascination with fire, and they were always rushing around to put out a new blaze she had started. This time, they weren't as lucky, and the flames engulfed the family home and left a black mark on our sleepy little neighborhood. Being 11 at the time, my friends and I set out to go explore the rubble. One day, a week or so after the tragedy, as we kicked around the piles of charred wood and burned belongings, you couldn't help but feel sad at such a loss of life. Surprisingly, amongst the debris was a doll, about 12 inches tall, just sitting there, sad and lonely without a home or a little girl to love her. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but it was the only thing not covered by the black, sooty aftermath. I scooped her up and decided to keep her, in memory of a little girl who had died too soon. The smell of the burnt-out husk of a house stuck in my nose for hours, sometimes almost making me gag. I couldn't get the thought of the little girl and her family out of my mind. How scary it must have been, how painful it was, and when it was all said and done, all that remained was this doll. I placed the doll on my bookshelf alongside a few other dolls and knickknacks. She looked much older than my other dolls and seemed out of place, but it was a reminder, and one I would come to find would be a very painful reminder. That night I woke up startled, like I couldn't figure out why or how I had been aroused from sleep so abruptly. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house was quiet. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom and confidently strode across my darkened bedroom when my foot caught on something. It sent me ass over tea kettle and I landed with a thud and a sharp, sickening pain in my left arm. At first it was numb, then it throbbed, then pain came crashing in like a tidal wave, and I let out a howl that woke my parents from a deep sleep. They ran in to check on me and found me sprawled on the floor, clutching my left arm and wailing in pain. When the light came on, I could finally see what had sent me to my painful crash. The doll had fallen off my shelf, and I had tripped over it. Even through the pain and tears, I thought it was strange. The doll was not very large or heavy, but when my foot caught on it, it felt like an anchored tree root. I never even felt the doll move as my foot crossed its path. Now, the rest of the night was spent in the local ER, where I was told the bone in my left arm had snapped. They call it a spiral fracture, and they casted me up. When I got home and climbed into bed, I quickly looked to the floor to warn my parents to be careful as they left the room and not trip over the doll, but she wasn't there. She was perched back on the shelf where she had fallen from. I figured Mom or Dad must have picked her up and placed her back on the shelf earlier during my fitful, tearful fest. The next few days were quiet at home. Nothing out of the ordinary except the fact that my dog, our Irish setter Rusty, would not enter my room, seeking love and attention as he always had. Instead, he would stand just outside the door, or lay there pathetically looking up at me but refusing to enter. I then had a very disturbing experience. I snatched the doll from the shelf and laid across my bed, my head at the foot of my bed and my feet where my head belonged, and I stared at the doll. I thought it was funny. After sitting in all that burned-out remains for nearly a week, this doll was very clean and had no smoky smell. A smell that still lingered on our block for what felt like forever. Then, as I looked into its eyes, I noticed something that made my heart stop. My eyes were as wide as saucers when I noticed. In the reflection of her big, glassy brown eyes, a little girl was standing in my doorway. I flipped around with a gasp, and to my utter astonishment, there was no one there. I was absolutely freaked out. I climbed to the head of my bed, put my back firmly against it, and called out, "Is someone there? Hello?" Rusty ambled to the doorframe and stopped. He lowered his head, and low, grumbling snarls started. I felt a wave of sickness come over me. I was so terrified I couldn't move. Rusty just stared at nothing and continued his snarl. Then, with a loud "Yeet!" he took off running down the hall and out of my sight. Thankfully, the dog's sharp cry brought my mom to my room to check things out. I told her what had happened, and she assured me I had made a simple mistake and it was my reaction and stress that freaked the dog out so much. Well, that seemed to settle me a bit, but I knew what I saw. I know there was a little girl standing in my bedroom door. A few days passed, and my parents and I had gone out for a movie and dinner. When we returned home, we were still laughing and talking about the movie Freaky Friday and how much fun it would be to swap bodies with each other for even just a day. I bounded down the hall to my room and stopped as I reached the threshold. There, strewn about my room, were the other dolls I had positioned on my shelf. The dolls were torn apart, fluff protruded from most of them. The heads were cracked or smashed. The only doll that seemed unfazed was the doll from the house down the street. She was on the floor, but she sat bolt upright. My parents came to see what I was so upset about. My dad walked farther down the hall and let out a loud laugh. We came running down to see what was going on, and our dog Rusty sat in the corner, his head lowered in a look of utter shame, like he used to do when he would have an accident in the house. Dad called out, "Hey, buddy, what did you do? What did you do?" Rusty just whimpered and lay down right in the spot he stood. Dad went over to scold the dog for tearing my collection apart, but this was so unlike Rusty. He never tore things apart, let alone my dolls or toys. We were flabbergasted. When Dad knelt to his side, he cradled Rusty's head in his hands and said sternly, "That's a naughty boy." When he pulled his hands back, he had slimy traces of dog drool and blood on them. He then examined the dog's mouth and found scratches all along the dog's gums, and many of them bleeding. "Oh, he got himself good chewing on your dolls, honey," Dad sympathetically called out to me. "He won't be doing that again." As Mom and I approached the room to clean the mess, we both stopped when we heard what sounded like a giggle come from my room. We both just stared at each other frozen. Dad brushed past us, yelling out, "Well, excuse me," as he passed, laughing at his own silly imitation of Steve Martin. We walked into the room, picked up and threw out the mess, and I grabbed the doll ready to put the lone survivor back on the shelf when I noticed her hands. Her fingers were covered in slimy dog drool and blood. I told Mom I didn't want this doll in my room tonight, so we put her in Dad's study and we shut the door. We both knew we were acting silly, but it brought us some temporary comfort. Later that night, we all woke up to the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor from inside Dad's study. We stood outside the door listening and in complete shock. It sounded like little footsteps, then something heavy being dragged or pushed on the hardwood floor. Dad got between Mom and me and the door and yelled out, "I have a gun! You better get the hell out of my house!" Dad, of course, did not have a gun, and I wasn't too sure he was ready to barge in and do battle dressed in his boxers and a keep-on-truckin' t-shirt and fuzzy slipper combo. Then, we all heard the giggle come from inside the room. Then the dragging noises stopped. Mom looked to Dad, and he looked surprised and whispered, "No goddamn way I'm going in there." We went back to my parents' room, locked the door, crawled into bed, and waited for the sun to rise. When it did, Dad dressed more appropriately, went to the study to see what was going on. When he steadied himself by the door, faithful Rusty at his side, he tried to throw open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something was up against the door, and Dad couldn't push past it. He and Rusty went outside, and Dad peered in the window, and all we heard was him exclaim, "Well, goddamn." It seems the only thing propped against that door was the doll, which was impossible. We had thrown her on a couch halfway across the room. Dad came back in determined to open the door. This time Rusty stayed far down the hall. Dad yelled out in a commanding voice, "Let me in the damned room!" and gave the door a huge shove, and it swung open effortlessly, the doll resting back on the couch where we had thrown it. Dad grabbed the doll out of the room and said, "That's it, this has to go." We followed him outside. He hopped in the car. We, of course, joined him to see what was going to happen. Rusty, relieved, just flopped in the yard in a sense of calmness. We drove down the block, my dad grumbling and mumbling the whole way, and he stopped abruptly in front of the remains of the house where workers were already lined up, ready to start clearing the area and bulldozing the structure. Dad hurled the doll at the house and stormed off to the car. We must have looked like a car full of lunatics. Dad climbed in behind the wheel, slammed the door, and we all turned to look, half expecting the demon doll to be following behind. That's when we saw the worker climb off the small dozer, walk over to the doll and pick it up, brush it off, and throw it in the cab of his vehicle. Mom said, "We should say something." Dad just retorted that it was their problem now, and we drove off to get something to eat. It took me almost 20 years before I would even walk past that area again. A new house was built and burned down a year later, almost to the date of the last fire. It sat vacant until just a few years ago when they began construction on a new house. And all I can say is, I wish them luck.
Beyond the darkness.
Welcome back to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. Today, we are doing the best of Theater of the Mind here on Sunday's episode and bringing you some of the scariest, some of the most bizarre episodes that we can find. Last segment, you heard from Bigfoot, from dolls, from periods in time like the Kennedy administration. This half of the program, you'll hear from masks, from near-death experiences, and from the Black-Eyed Kids. So without further ado, here's more of the Theater of the Mind.
Theater of the Mind, The Curse of the Mask, a true tale told from Glenn Thomas. I've always had an interest in the creepy and the macabre. My house is cluttered with strange collections like human teeth, creepy dolls, strange pieces of art done by serial killers, and the like. Now, I was always on the lookout for my next fascinating and freaky piece to add to my eclectic stockpile of oddities when I got a strange box shipped to my door. It was this hand-carved wooden mask. It was terrifying and a perfect item for my weird world. Nestled under the mask was a short note from my ex-girlfriend informing me she had bought this monstrosity while we were dating and wanted to surprise me with it for our anniversary, which, unfortunately, we never got to. She said she had no need for it and didn't know anyone else to give it to, so she wanted me to have it. Now, you have to admire her style. It was really weird and right up my alley. The details were beautifully carved into this hideous, demonic-looking face. It had long black hair that hung from it, and inside the mask were a series of patterns painted in these geometric designs I was not familiar with. Now, I would definitely have to do some research on this at some point to fully appreciate what I was now the proud owner of. I placed it on my shelf, dead center, between my creepy dolls and vampire hunting kit, and smiled to myself at how perfect it looked, and how well it seemed to fit in amongst the creepy clutter. Well, that night, as I was shutting off lights and heading to bed, I heard a loud crash come from my living room. I walked back in, flipped the switch, and there, smack dab in the middle of the room, was the mask, staring up at me from the carpet, the long fibers of the rug cradling it and giving a strange, eerie look to the mask, and an even stranger appearance with the shag poking through the eye holes, looking like worms bursting forth from a decaying corpse. I picked up my new treasure off the ground, turned to put it back on the shelf, and as I turned toward the shelving unit, I heard the distinct sound of a male voice behind me call out, "Hey!" Now, I spun around, startled, and I found myself facing an empty room. I knew what I had heard, but could not find a source. Every hair on my neck and arms stood upright, in more alarm than fear. The voice hadn't been scary or menacing, just unexpected. I returned the mask to its new home and flicked the light off and headed toward the stairs and my bed. I had obviously had a long day and was in desperate need of sleep. When I got to the top of the stairs, I heard a loud creak behind me, like someone stepped onto the bottom stair. I turned quickly and my knees went weak. I had to grab the handrails to steady myself. There, at the bottom of the stairs, was the outline of someone, medium build, thin, and wild hair. My voice eked out, barely audible. "What do you want? What are you doing here?" It just stood there, unmoving, staring up at me, its silhouetted frame backlit by the clock from the microwave in the kitchen. I couldn't see its face, and I was not close enough to the light switch to reach it to illuminate the hall and the stairway. I just stood there, breathing heavily, unsure what to do or what to say. I backed up slowly, the stairs creaking softly as I moved. My hand was extended behind me, searching for the light switch. The intruder stood silent and motionless. I was filled with dread and abject horror, but forced myself to turn away long enough to locate the switch and see who I was facing. Maybe by lighting up the area, I would gain some advantage. The light switch clicked, and the hallway was filled with light. My head spun quickly back to face my mystery guest, and when it did, there was no one there. Had he backed out of sight in the moment that it took for me to look away and find the light switch? Then I felt what I can only describe as a hand brush mine on the light switch, and as quickly as it turned on, the lights were off again. I moved without thought swiftly back down the stairs, and I hit the light at the bottom and began charging from room to room, flipping every and any switch I could so that not a corner would be left in the dark. Somewhere along the line, I had dropped my cell phone and was now backed somewhat poorly into a corner where I stood. The only sound was my labored breathing and the ticking of the clock in the hall. I tried to focus my ears, straining to hear footsteps or anything giving me a possible location of my intruders. That's when I cried out. I'm going to leave. Take what you want and please leave. I won't call the cops. I don't want trouble. I just want to be left alone. That's when I made a break for the door, where I made good on my promise and did not call the cops, as I wasn't sure what had happened and was second-guessing myself as to what I had witnessed. I didn't know what to tell them for sure and did not want to embarrass myself if I had been mistaken about what had just happened. Now I waited a few hours and I returned. The house seemed untouched. Nothing inside had been moved or taken, and I had somehow gotten the nerve up to walk through every possible place a person could hide, and I found nothing. There was no one there. I made my way back to my room, slowly climbed into bed, reassuring myself I had just imagined it all. I was tired, under a lot of stress in my personal and professional life, and I must have hallucinated the whole damn thing. I lay on my bed and rolled to my stomach, slid my arm under my pillow for extra support under my head, when I felt something. I sat upright and moved the pillow, and there, lying beneath it, was the mask from downstairs. Now, I thought I had put it back on the shelf before I came upstairs. Could I have mistaken and dragged it up here with me, maybe throwing it on the bed and not remembering? Now, I convinced myself this is what had to have happened. I threw the ugly thing to the nightstand and drifted off into the most restless sleep I'd ever experienced. My alarm bell rang and I groggily woke up, swung my legs to the floor and stood, preparing to make my way to the bathroom. I took my first step and took a hell of a stumble. My foot came to rest on the inside of the mask, and it was curved just enough to send me falling to the ground, and I felt the sickening crack of my forearm as I tried to catch myself. I let out a yelp of pain and anger for having been so clumsy. I rolled, clutching my arm, reeling in pain. I'd broken the damn thing. A perfect ending to a horrendous night. Now, things only got worse for the next week. On the way to the ER, I was broadsided and sustained a concussion. I got removed from a big and financially secure project at work and took a serious hit to my pay. Then found my favorite furry friend had passed away in his sleep a week later. He was an old cat, but spry to the end, and it was a surprise. A dark cloud had descended onto my life, and I was confused as to why. It took a few more minor mishaps to make me realize all of this started the day I got that damn mask. I knew it was ridiculous to even consider. Even though I loved the supernatural and the concepts behind it, I was not much of a believer. I didn't think this actually existed. But aside from all the bad luck I was having, I kept waking to see that wild-haired menace lurking, dashing from my room, peeking around corners, slamming doors. I started looking into the mask, left a few voicemails for my ex to ask where she had gotten it, and I got no response. I checked a few message boards online and was directed to call a woman in New Orleans who knew all about this kind of stuff. and who better to call than a woman named Bloody Mary? I told her of my situation and about the mask, half expecting her to laugh at me or hang up. She took it very seriously and professionally. She had me explain the mask in detail and the markings inside, and that's when she told me someone had passed on a cursed item to me. Something unearthly had been bound to it, and it was meant to do harm. I shook my head in disbelief and shock. Had my ex really cursed me? I mean, seriously, what the She told me to get sea salt, a cloth, and rope, and gave me some things to say and do. I placed the mask in the middle of the cloth, covered it in the salt, and then folded the cloth over it. Then used the rope to wrap around the cloth with the mask still inside. I said the incantation and took the package to the nearest bridge where I hurled it off the side. I went home, said some blessings in each room, and worked my way out to the front door where I insisted whatever was there had to leave. I stood there feeling somewhat foolish, but at the same time relieved, when the front door slammed violently. I jumped and let out a nervous laugh. I never did hear from that ex again, or from my wild-haired, raving, shadowy roommate, and never may still not be long enough for me. This week's Theater of the Mind comes from the real experience of Joe Baker. All creatures, great and small. In the summer of 1977, I was in LIT, a leader in training at a YMCA summer camp in Iowa. I had attended that Y camp since around 1967 as a camper, and I loved it so much, I decided to become a counselor as I got older and I aged out of the program. My summers there were magical. They were filled with fun, laughter, and making some lifelong friends. We would spend days making crafts, canoeing, shooting rifles, learning archery, and swimming. Oh yes, there was swimming, our refreshing escape from that summer heat. As a camper around 1970, our small group had gone for a canoe trip down the lake. We pulled into a nice alcove with a rope swing and decided to take a swim. As we climbed out of our canoes and dragged them into shore, we could hear the sound of excited splashing and playing in the lake on the other side of the little hill. So we decided to see what all the action was, in hopes that maybe there were some girls swimming there. We came up over the small hill, and our group was stunned to see a huge, and I mean huge, hairy, ape-like creature splashing around in the lake, playing like a small kid. We stood there with a collective look of shock and confusion on our faces. We had been warned enough about wildlife and to never try to encounter it, so we slowly began backing up, as quietly as we could. Just the most subtle of sound of rocks crunching underneath our feet would give us away. But the gorilla man, as we would come to call him, seemed so wrapped up in his playtime that he never took notice of us. We made it our mission to return there every few days in hopes of seeing him again. We would even leave treats of apples, half-eaten PB&Js, and potato chips. When we would return, we would find all of those donations gone. Now, I'm fully aware that it could have been any number of wild animals that would eat the food, but we love to consider that it was just our playful pal. A few of the counselors would tell ghost stories at night, and once, when asked about monsters in the woods, they began telling us about a native creature. I don't recall what they called it at the time, but they perfectly described what we had seen. And that it was, at that time, one of the kids I had been with that day blurted out what we had witnessed and where. The next morning, we were cut off from our canoes and told in no uncertain terms that we were not allowed to visit that area again, by any means. It was safer to stay away, as we most likely stumbled on a local bear colony and we could be in great danger. I'm no animal expert, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't a bear. Now, back to 1977 as an LIT, it was my duty to help create schedules and activities, games, and lead our group to our timed excursions, where most times the lead counselors would already be there setting up and preparing for our arrival. Today, we were going on a canoe trip. I got rather excited when we loaded into our canoes and our leader began paddling toward the area I had visited all those years ago and had my encounter. We found the same spot by the rope swing and pulled our canoes to shore and set off for a short hike and a swim. I was very excited to be visiting that same area that had been so enigmatic to me and had been cut off to campers for so many years. The visit was uneventful. Until it wasn't. We returned to our canoes to begin our journey home when sploosh! A huge rock had come sailing overhead and hit the water with tremendous force. We all stopped what we were doing and looked around when we saw another overhead projectile headed our way. It hit the water well behind our canoes and let out again with another loud splash. We climbed quickly into our vessels and launched them to head home. Our group chattered like mad the whole ride back. It was a mixed bag of excitement, fear, and nervous energy. When we returned, our lead counselor said, guys, maybe we shouldn't go back there again. And that was that. Well, for him, I mean. I took the chance to row out there a few more times because I did know one thing. Bears do not throw rocks. Again, I returned and left treats and would sneak back whenever possible to check the area, and as before, the treats were always gone. After a few rock-free days, I set out for one last adventure. It was close to sunset and we weren't allowed on canoes or in the lake after nightfall. I had about 90 minutes of free time before our evening activities, so I made my way back to the rope swing and I climbed out. Made my way over the rise and opened my pack to leave some more food. As I made my way to a safe viewing area, I was alerted to the sound of something running toward the food, something fast and much smaller than the large creature I had witnessed. I turned to see what scavenger was making off with my donations, and there, crossing the ridge, was a short, alien-like creature. I stumbled back a few paces, the leaves beneath my feet crunching, and the thing stopped, turned its head in my direction and paused. It looked at me, bent down, scooped up the treats, and took off running. And there, before my eyes, this thing began to grow. Huge and hairy. I was watching a surreal version of Darwin's Theory of Evolution chart in an animated live view. It went from a small, scrawny, hairless creature into a hulking behemoth in the matter of 50 or so yards. Then it dashed off into the woods for seclusion. I turned and ran as fast as my teenage legs would carry me back to the canoe, pushed off and paddled my ass back to camp. I was excited and terrified at the same time. I was bursting at the seams, wanting to tell someone of what had just happened, but I thought better of it. I couldn't sleep that night as I lay in my bunk staring out into the darkness, trying to rationalize what I had seen. That's when I heard the footfalls of something large headed through the woods, heading my way. Perhaps just one of the neighboring counselors making his way back to his cabin from the communal outhouse. Then I heard the snorting, a loud snort and a sniffing noise. I recognized the sound from earlier that day. After that thing had transmogrified in front of me, it had stopped briefly and snorted the air like a predator trying to catch the scent of its prey. Then it strode out of the woods, walking directly toward my cabin with purpose. My heart was banging inside my chest like a jackhammer. I could barely breathe as it strode even closer to my cabin. I whimpered, wanting to cry out, but I was unable to. That's when I had a strange sense of euphoria that washed over me. And I could swear a calming voice filled my head, a voice that reassured me that
everything is fine. You're in no danger.
The creature got very near my window and stared in through the screen at me. It then bent down and set something on the ground. It stood upright, snorted quietly, and gave me a strange grimace. I got the feeling that it was trying to smile. It turned and moved toward the woods, its heavy footfalls gradually getting lighter as I saw it revert back to its smaller, hairless form. As it entered the woods, there was what I can only describe as a flash of lightning, followed by a thunder crack that shook our cabins and woke everyone with a start. Within moments, there was a deluge of rain, and a loud mechanical humming sound filled the air. A hum that was gentle but louder than the rain itself, and with another flash of light that seemed not to come from the clouds, but rather from the ground toward the clouds. The hum was gone. We scrambled outside to shut every heavy wooden shuttered window we could to keep the cabin from being blasted from rain. When I got outside the window of my bunk, I found a rounded, twisted ball of sticks. I picked it up and finished my task of closing the shutters. I returned to the cabin, and we all sat around excitedly talking about the storm and the ferocity of it. I eventually fell asleep, holding the twisted ball of sticks. That was 40 years ago. I still have my gift displayed on my shelf in the study. I cannot say what it was I saw, but I think a lot of people have it wrong. I don't think the things that we see are separate. I think that they may all be a race of shapeshifters that have been here for centuries and will be here long after we are. They're survivors. They adapt. They're magic and the creatures of folklore and fantasy. They are what they need to be to survive. Today's story comes from the real-life experience of Randy Bump. Nothing is quite as it seems. In the fall of 1989, I had had a long night of drinking and hanging out with my friends and decided driving was not in my best interest. I made my way around the noisy bar, saying my goodnights, exchanging handshakes, high fives, and hugs along the way. And when I finally crossed the gauntlet of drunken friends, neighbors, and coworkers, I reached the exit to the bar. When I pushed open the doors to the outside, I was met with a welcoming blast of fresh, cool air. And as the doors behind me closed, the sound of the party inside faded, and I set forth for my 2-mile walk home. I had walked this lonely walk many more times than I care to admit, but it was the right thing to do, and I refused to get behind the wheel of my car in this condition. Now, when I say this condition, I want it made clear. I was enjoying a nice mellow, and there may or may not have been some slight staggering on my walk home, but I was not fall-down stupid drunk. I was in a place of ease and comfort. You should know that for what I'm about to share. As I plodded along what seemed like an endless stretch of dark highway before me, I turned my hazy gaze to the skies above me, thoroughly enjoying the expansive night sky. That was when I noticed something dark, long, and silent, hovering in the sky just ahead of me. It looked massive, maybe like a DC-10 in length, but it was triangle and hovered there silently. I kept my eyes fixed on the looming craft as I continued my journey. The mix of cool, fresh air and the slow but steadily increasing boost of adrenaline was rousing me from my inebriated state, and my fuzzy mind was becoming sharp and inquisitive as to what it was I was actually witnessing. The strange thing was that cars would whiz past me on this road, weary travelers seeking the safety of their homes, but no one seemed to be seeing what I was. Maybe they were too drunk or in just too big a hurry to cast their gaze towards the heavens, but I was enthralled. I noticed that as I got closer to the craft, the air was stale, not moving, and thick and muggy. Where moments before, and simply a few yards behind me, there was a gentle cooling breeze. Then the road around me lit up like daylight. It was as bright as high noon. I shielded my eyes with my hands and tipped my head back to look for the source that the light was coming from. It was blinding. My eyes squinted against the harsh, stark white light, and my hand moved to shield some of that light in an ineffective attempt to get a better look at what was casting this light down on me. When it got too intense, I squeezed my eyes tightly closed, head still tipped back. But when I opened them again, I was surprised to see that I was damn near home, and the light was gone. Now you should know, the place I stopped on the road to look upward to the light was still a good mile to maybe 1.25 miles from my home. Now I was standing less than a few blocks away. I hadn't moved, it was just that fast. I looked at my watch, and to my irritation, it had stopped at about 1:18 a.m. I glanced back down the road towards my house, and then turned to face the direction I had just come from. I was puzzled. I traveled a pretty good distance in the blink of an eye and had no memory of it. One minute I'm standing in the middle of the road staring skyward and shielding my eyes from a brilliant light. The next second I'm 1 mile or so down the road. I shook my head and headed towards home. Running the night's events through my mind, fast, then slow, then focusing on the event on the road, then I heard the noise of something moving behind me and closing in. Light footfalls on the pavement. I turned to see who was heading my way at this rapid pace, and to my utter disbelief, it was a short figure, huge head, giant black orb-like eyes. Not almond-shaped, they were rounded black pools of weirdness, and it was moving toward me with determination. I yelled, "Hey man, back off!" And to my astonishment, it stopped. and like a confused puppy, its head tilted to the side as if it was sad for having been spoke to so harshly. Then, the light struck the road a few hundred yards back up the road from where I had just been, and it began traveling silently but swiftly through the air. There was a sound of rushing wind, but nothing mechanical, no engine, just wind moving like a storm was blowing at breakneck speed. My little friend looked toward the light, then turned to face me again. Its face looked much less friendly this time, and it put its head down and began to charge me, the light falling in closely behind it. I didn't know what to do, but I did know I was ready to kick this little fella into next week if it kept running up on me. It seemed like the closer he got, the slower he moved, the louder the roar of the wind. I positioned myself to give this alien a hell of a kick, and it looked up at me, its mouth turned downward in a cross between pain and rage, and I let go with my leg. And at that exact moment, the light hit me. I was surrounded by the sound of crashing glass as my foot connected with the vase on my coffee table in my living room. I had sent it flying and it hit the wall hard, shattering into hundreds of pieces. The light flickering on and off, and my roommate came running down into the living room, baseball bat in hand, demanding to know what the hell just happened. I turned and said, I don't know. I seriously, I don't know. A minute ago, I was on the road down the block about to give a swift kick to something charging me, and the next thing I know, my kick connected to the vase, and I'm in my dark living room. He looked at me like I had lost my damn mind, and I heard him mutter as he turned away to go back to his room. Drunk idiot. I stood there at a complete loss. What the hell just happened to me? I eventually made my way to the bathroom and decided to take a quick hot shower, and as I pulled my shirt over my head, I was astonished to see a series of red dots forming a triangle on my chest. Blood trickled from one of the wounds. I lifted my finger to the bleeding hole and touched it. I was met with white-hot, blinding pain, and when I let out a scream of pain, I found myself sitting bolt upright in my bed. That's when I heard the violent thumping on my wall. 3 loud bangs against the wall. I was terrified, unable to move. That's when I heard my roommate yell from the next room, "Keep it down in there, Jesus! People are trying to sleep." I shook my head, reached to my chest, and found scabbed over wounds that looked days old. I thought I was losing my mind. I laid down and closed my eyes, my mind whirling. And then as I began to fall asleep, I saw him, his face, those big round black eyes, and the turned-down mouth opened, and from it a loud, ear-shattering noise that sounded like an alarm clock. My alarm clock. I opened my eyes and hit the snooze button. I looked at the clock, and in amazement, it was 11 a.m. 2 days later.
Thank you for tuning in and checking out today's special edition of Beyond the Darkness. We hope you're enjoying Theater of the Mind as much as we enjoy putting it together for you. And remember, you can share your stories with us anytime. We'd love to hear your stories. You can email them to me, Dave@darknessradio.com. And if you write them as a narrative, like you're hearing in the stories that we've been playing for you, it may be featured on an upcoming episode of Beyond the Darkness. Or if you'd like to give us a call and leave us one of our Voices from Beyond voicemails, call us now at 651-300-4977. 651-300-4977 and share your real-life encounters with the strange and supernatural.
Today's Theater of the Mind comes from Emily P., an unwanted gift. I don't know where to begin because I've always been keenly aware that I was different. I mean, yes, I'm a goofy person by nature. I'm a good storyteller and love to entertain and spread joy. But when I'm not, or wasn't being a goofball, I was growing up rough, critical, and all around weird. Long story short, I had a rockier childhood than people would like to know about. The experiences, yes, those type of experiences, began young, as did the abuse. I thought it was just an imaginative kid, then teen, then maybe just an imaginative young adult, who has now turned into an adult. I couldn't keep dismissing my experiences. Of course, I entertained my creating these happenings due to the abuse and overall horrid upbringing. But, well, I've been checked out, and I've tried meds for depression and anxiety, yet still, things continue to happen. Once, when I came home from work, I was about 18 years old. No one was home. All the family was at work or school. Now, I resembled a much older Dora the Explorer, but more awkward and less explorer-y. It's early in the day, so I decide to take a shower. I do my rounds as I warm the water for my bath. Quiet as ever. Perfect to take a relaxing 20-minute soak after making coffee for a-holes all morning. To be clear, I had 3 sisters, 1 mother, and 2 cats, all living in a 2-bedroom home. This time was my precious. I stepped in, closed the big, heavy, ancient shower curtains, and begin my process. Not long after I do so, I felt something very strange start to well up inside of me. What the hell is this feeling? I know this feeling. What? Something's wrong. No, wait. I'm scared. I stopped what I was doing and turned off the water. I stood there like a wet rat covered in suds, hoping my luxury bath time was not being interrupted by one of my tribe. I listened, and for some reason, this feeling I mentioned earlier began to grow, almost paralyzing me. And then, swoosh, the shower curtain tears open, and I scream so loud and hard, my teeth vibrate. There was no one there. In terror, I fell out of the shower, grabbing my towel on the way down. This bathroom was small. No one was there. No one snuck in. The only window was above my head in the shower space and could not accommodate a person. Okay, maybe a Smeagol-sized person, but we weren't living in the Shire, so I knew in an instant I wasn't alone. I looked to the door and grabbed the handle. It was locked. I didn't lock it, nor would I. Being alone in the house with no sign of family coming home, I had hours before I would see the likes of them. I cried out, "Please, let me go!" And then the handle released. I trampled out, barely holding on to whatever I was grabbing as I was fleeing. I only had one thought in mind: grab the phone and get the hell out of this place. Go to the neighbor's house and take it from there. As I stood outside, I looked into the apartment from the neighbor's front porch, a few feet away. I knew whatever it was finally got my attention. It was like it had been trying, and it was going to be heard that very moment. And the energy that poured out of that tiny apartment was palpable. My mother calmed me down and gently reminded me to go inside before someone thinks I'm selling something that isn't for sale. I smiled uncomfortably as she stated this. You have a light inside you, Mia. A light that attracts these things to you. To us. Wait, what? Is this where she tells me that I have a brother named Dean and we're going to have to fight some demons together? No, sadly, no. She just went on to tell me how we have a gift and we need to share it. Use it for good and never let them run you out of your home again. I wish I had time to go into the again part, but alas, that's a story for another day. This week, from the Darchives, we look into the Black-Eyed Hybrid Conundrum, a real-life encounter shared by Dre Fordham on Theater of the Mind. My mom and I had been chatting about the topic of ghosts. During our chat, I brought up the phenomenon of black-eyed kids. She'd not heard of them, so I gave her the details that we'd been learning about as a paranormal community. She said that this BEK thing sounded a lot like a story my dad, Chuck, had told her. My dad died when I was only 19. He was known to be a strange guy with strange events happening to him. I enjoyed the stories, and he's mostly the reason I grew up with as much of an open mind as I have. My dad continues to be the most confusing human I'd ever met, but I never doubted the things that he told me. My mom said that he shared a story with her that happened to him when he was 14 in the year 1941. He said that day he was in town and saw 3 boys picking on a dog and being mean to it. Now, my dad loved animals more than humans and risked our lives in the car many times to avoid hitting even a raccoon. So he went up against the boys and did a pretty good job for himself and the dog as he brawled with the boys. And the dog went home with him. Later that evening, he was home alone and he heard the doorknob on the front door turning. Back then, doors were not locked in homes like they are today. He started for the front, thinking it was his parents returning. But as he got in view of the door, he saw the hand of a kid, not an adult. As the door was open for only a few inches, he assumed it was the boys from earlier that day, seeking revenge for messing with them. He marched to the door, flinging it open, again to confront the boys. But as he opened it, he saw that these were 3 different boys. They were looking behind them and down the path, even the one that had been opening the door. He said he didn't recognize him at all. The closest boy bent down to tie his shoe and at that same time asked if they could come inside. At this age, my dad lived in Daniel Boone's home in Pennsylvania. It's now a museum called Daniel Boone's Homestead, but at the time the property needed work and my dad and his parents lived on site as caretakers while the location was being restored. The home comes with lots of land, and it was strange for wandering others to just come down this long driveway. So my dad asked them why they were here. The boy tied his other shoe and said that they got turned around and were new to the location and did not know which way was back to town. As the closest boy stood up, he looked at my dad, and he saw that their eyes were black, all black. My dad told my mom that it was at this moment he knew that these things were aliens. My dad had a few encounters before this that he considered extraterrestrial, and a few he thought that were possible abductions. So this, I imagine, is what made him come to the conclusion that these were, in fact, aliens. He said he told them they could not come in, but he felt dizzy, not very strong. He said the boys stood there, looking at him. As he reached to close the door, he said the door seemed very heavy and much larger than it really was. Then, the first boy stepped over the threshold of the door frame, and my dad became very faint. He said he backed away as the other 2 boys also entered the house. He also said that at that moment the first boy stepped into the house, it felt like gravity was leaving the whole home. He said he was not sure how he knew it was the whole home losing gravity, but he just knew it. He said he kept looking at the boys, but started falling very slowly. He figured the slow motion descent was because of the lack of gravity. During his fall, the boys came to his side and one at his feet, but they seemed like they were level with him, as if he were on a table. But he could tell he was on the floor of his own home. As he started to panic, he lost consciousness. During his blackout, he found himself driving a car in Hong Kong. He knew it was himself, but an older version of himself. He was still American, but visiting Hong Kong. He was stopped in traffic because everyone was looking to the sky. He also looked out his front window and saw a large fireball of fire flying across the horizon, so low that he thought it was going to take out some of the buildings. But the fireball continued without causing any damage and left everyone shocked at what they had seen. My dad said when he opened his eyes, he was on his couch and he could hear the boys leaving and shutting the door behind them. He said during this vision, he never once thought about the boys that had entered his house. As a related event, one of the stories my dad told me was about a time in his early 20s, and he was in New York City in traffic when he saw, along with many others, a huge fireball streaking low across the sky. Evidently, later, he learned that many others in Hong Kong had seen the same thing during that time. What my dad was obsessed with was the direction the fireball was flying. It would have had to turn to make it to Hong Kong. He said meteors don't turn. I have no idea how he knew others in Hong Kong saw this, and I've not done research on it to prove it. But I have no idea why my dad never included the tie-in to the black-eyed kids. My mom said that he never mentioned that the kids were dressed odd or old-time. Maybe they were dressed as we hear about them now, in 1940s attire. So then it wouldn't have been so odd. If I had to trust what my dad said and speculate, I think this could be what happened. They did abduct him, and he was on the ship, but they made it look like his home. This could be the answer to why gravity felt as though it were leaving. and maybe anyone who's come in contact with the black-eyed kids just think they were able to resist because that's what they want you to remember. And maybe my dad was just able to hold on to a little bit of the truth. Today we have a fresh submission into the Darchives. Ron Smaltz shares his real-life story, My Friend Seth, on today's Theater of the Mind. Up until a few weeks ago, I thought I was going crazy after having had an experience when I was a kid. I've been so stressed by this for over 30 years, worried that I was a complete mental case. But after hearing a similar story on your show recently, I felt compelled to share my tale. I had a friend in grade school. We'll call him Seth. Seth was a good friend, but very peculiar. He always seemed to be a bit, off. I guess that's the best way to describe him. His parents were very protective. It was hard to get close to him because of that. They seemed cold, aloof, and unwilling to let their son have a normal childhood. No sports, no parties, no sleepovers. But that changed one night. We had hung around, mostly at school, because as I pointed out, he wasn't allowed to do much else. His 13th birthday was approaching, and we talked about celebrating. He seemed hesitant, but you could see in his eyes how much he wanted to. Seth was just certain that his parents wouldn't allow him to do it. I asked if he was part of one of those weird religions where they didn't celebrate birthdays and holidays. He would just shrug and say, I guess so. And I always left it at that. To our surprise, his parents invited me over for dinner and TV. I decided to go and try to help my friend have a fun birthday. It was November of 1988, and shortly after I arrived, the snow began to fall, and fall hard. We had dinner, spent some time in his room talking and hanging out and watched some TV. By this time, the snow had built up pretty good and was turning out to be a full-on blizzard. You could barely see 5 feet out of the window. It was a classic whiteout. Seth begged his parents to let me spend the night. At first they declined and assured me they would get me home safely when the snow let up. But the snow had other plans. That storm kept up and showed no signs of relenting. I heard his parents debating the idea of allowing the sleepover. They kept going to the picture window, looking up to the skies and just shaking their head in disbelief. At this point, I overheard them say, "Travel would be dangerous." "Yeah, I agree." And with that, they decided to let me spend the night and called my parents. All the while, they kept looking to the sky. Their faces almost looked tortured. Were they that concerned about the snow, the sleepover, or something else? At this point, Seth's dad draped an arm over his wife's shoulder and said, "It's so bad out there. They'll never get through. This'll be fine. It'll all be fine." Nothing very eventful happened for the rest of the night. Well, for the rest of the night until after midnight, that is. We had settled in for the night. I borrowed a pair of PJs from Seth and taught him the fine art of making a blanket tent in his room, and we were off to sleep. At some point, I woke to an intense light filling Seth's room. Light streaming in from the windows. It poured through the cracks in our makeshift tent, and I noticed my friend was nowhere to be found. I assumed he had headed off to the bathroom, and I laid there squinting, partially shielding my eyes from the glare. I mean, come on, what was with this light? I noticed at that point, my hearing was off. Everything sounded slow, like the ticking of the clock on the hall wall. My breath, and even when I spoke, I called out to Seth, and my voice, it sounded distorted. "Seth, where are you, man?" I rolled over and started crawling toward the opening of our tent and felt like every movement was in slow motion, like I was slogging through quicksand to move. My body was slow. My mind raced. I realized I was terrified. I couldn't understand what was happening. I finally made my way to the bedroom door and threw it open. It too moved in slow motion. More light poured through the door. I couldn't make sense of this. It had to be a dream. That's when I saw his parents standing silently in the hall, side by side. I was now in full-blown panic mode. What was happening? The parents began to flicker. I know it sounds crazy, but it looked like a picture on an old TV trying to be tuned in. They flickered in and out. The intense light surrounded them. And that's when his parents turned slowly to face me, the light burning my eyes as I tried to look at them.
Where is Seth? What's happening?
I cried out. His parents continued to flicker, and I saw what looked like another image that was revealed between flickers. Small figures, huge heads. It was as if they were trying to hide, being cloaked by the image of his parents. I thought I was losing my mind. I closed my eyes tight and began whimpering. Then came a very loud humming sound. It shook the house. I could hear glasses and plates, pictures on the walls and cabinets rattling. And then there was silence. I opened my eyes. I was in my room. At home. Still in the PJs I had borrowed from Seth. I ran downstairs, asked my parents what was going on, and they were quite shocked to see me come from up in my room. They thought I was miles away at Seth's house. I tried to tell them what happened. My folks, bless their hearts, just dismissed it and said I must have been sleepwalking and come home. With that, they called over to Seth's house, but the phone just rang and rang. No answer, no answering machine. It just rang. I knew there was no way I had walked all that way in my sleep, in the blizzard. Holy shit, I thought. The blizzard. My bed would have been soaked, and there would have to be footprints leading up to our house in that heavy, deep snow. I ran to the window, pulled hard on the string that raised my blinds. They clattered as they shot up, and I peered out my window. There were no tracks. My bed was dry. I was dry and warm. I knew I never walked home, but I'll be damned to explain how I got home. As if that wasn't weird enough, Seth never came back to school. His dad got transferred to a job in Ohio, and the family reportedly moved immediately. I never heard back from him again. Using social media and technology, I looked everywhere for Seth online a few years ago, and I couldn't find a trace of him. He had an unusual name, and I couldn't find anybody with that name. Anywhere. Ever. Thank you for letting me get this off my chest and unburden my mind on something that has tortured me for years. I feel for the very first time like a heavy weight has been lifted from me. I'm resigned to believe I had an alien encounter, maybe hybrid. And after writing this all out, I went outside, looked to the skies, and I whispered, Seth, wherever you are, man, I hope you're safe.
After a life of parochial schooling, I had a falling out with religion, church, and my faith. It no longer suited me, and I found it silly, and nothing more than old superstitions cobbled together as a money-making scheme for churches. I never considered myself a bad person, certainly no worse than anyone else I knew. Like many, I was often selfish and not nearly as neighborly or caring as I could be. I had moved into my neighborhood when I was 27 and never once had a word with any of my neighbors besides a simple nod of the head in passing. Then, everything I knew changed on a summer day, a few months after I turned 45. I was out mowing my lawn when I felt my stomach start to sour, a strange sensation in my chest, and I immediately regretted that gas station burritos I had scarfed down for lunch. The heat was getting to me, and I cut off the lawnmower to take a sip of water. Then it hit me like a thunderous punch from Mike Tyson, square in the chest. My mouth dropped open into a silent scream, and my vision began to flicker. I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood, kids playing, dogs barking, people mowing their own lawns. Then it was silent. All I could hear was the offbeat rhythm of my own heartbeat, pulsing in my ears. Throbbing, throbbing, throbbing. Then the lights went out, and I collapsed. I remember feeling like I was laying on my parents' waterbed when I was a child. Then slowly, lights started to flicker once more, and I could hear voices. Oh, he's here. Finally, he's here. Then I could see bright light, and set against it was the stark silhouettes of people. Voices sounded familiar but distant, calling my name. I began to feel lighter, floating, and my vision slowly began to return to me. And I could see a mass of people smiling, waving. Some appeared to be crying. And when I realized that, I
I began to feel a sense of dread and fear come over me. Their smiling faces gave way to somber looks. I felt like I was in a large freight elevator looking out at the crowd, and then the bottom dropped out. And I heard what I thought was my mother sobbing as I fell. Through the darkness, terror growing inside me. I was so confused, so scared. I fell for what felt like 10 minutes. Just imagine, the scariest drop from the roller coaster you've ever been on, only it kept going and going and going. Then my body stopped with a jerking motion. I had the sensation of chains wrapped around my wrists and ankles, suspending me above something. I could feel heat, but not like any heat I had ever felt before. I felt it coming at me like waves of heat you see coming off the road ahead on a hot day. The chains, heavy and dense, jangled loudly whenever I tried to move. The blackness around me seemed alive, moving like something from a horror movie. I could hear slithering, but could see nothing. The chains biting into my hands and ankles with every move. Then, the cacophony of screams below me erupted. Slow at first, then it seemed to be coming at me from every angle. Men, women, children, and something animal and very angry. This wailing filled my head and I begged for it to stop. I hung there for days and days. The screams would ebb and then return with a vengeance. My head pounded, every muscle in my naked body screaming out for relief. The darkness all around gave me the most horrific sense of isolation. Even surrounded by voices and screams, I felt so alone, so cold inside while sweating and burning on the outside. Then, the slithering sounds began again, and I could sense something striking at me, like long claws. They would often miss, and I could feel the rush of air from unseen claws, then spasms of pain as they would find their target. Then joyous, dark laughter would bellow from below me. I was going insane. I would cry out but make no sound. I struggled against the chains that would not give. This went on without mercy for weeks. My mind was dissolving into madness. I had a life review, if you can call it that. As I lay there, suspended and aching, I kept trying to rationalize what was happening to me, but the more I did, the more fruitless it seemed. Was this hell? Was I dead? Was this really hell? An actual hell? I tried to remember any stupid prayer from childhood but couldn't. Instead, I would just remember every hateful thing, every nasty word I spoke, and every person I ever lashed out at. I would feel their sadness, all of it, from all of them, all at once. It was devastating. Then I felt the blows to my chest, and what I could only describe as lightning strikes appearing before my eyes. With every brilliant stroke of light, I could see the faces that surrounded me, locked in horror, mouths agape, screaming, eyes gone or dark and sinister, staring at me with such hate and contempt. The wailing of the voices was everywhere again. Flash, flash, flash. The lights would streak around the room, lighting up more horrors with every flash, flash, flash. I felt the claws swiping at me, the growls from below sounding more angered than ever before. I would feel my flesh tear and my mind screamed in agony as the lights would flash, and the pounding from inside my chest grew more intense. I hung my head and stopped resisting the bonds of the chains, and in my head I cried out, "I'm sorry, so sorry. Please, God, let this end." Then there was silence. There was nothing. Then, as fast as I had fallen, I began to feel myself flying at an inconceivable speed upwards. The cries below began, but sounded hollow and millions of miles away. I realized the chains were gone from my ankles and wrists, and the lightning started again, but I couldn't see anything, just sharp white light that hurt my eyes, and the electric crackle sound it left ringing in my ears. Then there was a face before me, the last flash of white light, and I could see someone or something standing before me. That's when I heard a gentle voice say,
"It's not too late."
And all went black. I could feel my body. I could hear background noises filtering in. I could hear voices calling my name, begging me to come back. Then I heard the words, "Clear!" And my body jumped as something hit my chest and filled me with electricity. My eyes sprang open and the pain came crashing through. I was laying in my yard surrounded by neighbors and police and EMTs feverishly working on me. I looked up and I saw the face of the portly little EMT working so hard to bring me back. He leaned down and said, "I thought I lost you. Glad you didn't give up. You were gone for about 3 to 5 minutes there before we started working on you." What? 3 to 5 minutes? How was that possible? I languished for what I knew was weeks on end, being tormented, screamed at, and torn to pieces slowly. Eternity means something more to me now, I'll tell you that. I lived the pain of everyone I ever hurt. It felt like forever. Now, sometimes at night when I lay there unable to sleep, I can hear the screams of torment. I can feel the claws trying to grab me, but I always come back to the soft voice that said,
"It's not too late."
God, I hope not.
Thank you all for tuning in and spending your day with us here today. We hope you enjoyed today's special edition of Beyond the Darkness as much as we enjoyed bringing all these stories together for you. Some of the most hair-raising, bizarre, and unusual stories we've ever shared on our program. And we want to continue to hear from you so that we can continue sharing these amazing stories with listeners worldwide. So remember, you can always email your tales right to me at dave@darknessradio.com. It may be featured on an upcoming Saturday episode, or if you've written it out clearly, concisely, and narrative, we may feature it as one of our upcoming Theater of the Mind episodes. And if that's not enough for you, say you want to call in and be a part of the show, well, we've got our Voices from Beyond phone call line. You can call 651-300-4977 and leave your creepy story. 651-300-4977. It can be funny, creepy, heartwarming, strange, funny. We want to know your supernatural stories. So call in, leave us a 3-minute message. If you've got more to tell, then call right back in, continue your story, and Tim will edit those pieces together to create one cohesive story for us to feature on an upcoming episode of the show. We hope you had a delightful Thanksgiving week and weekend. We'll be back again with you next weekend with all brand new episodes of Beyond the Darkness. And remember, come see me this next weekend. I'll be out in Madison, Wisconsin at Wizard World. And you can find more information at wizardworld.com. I'll be on hand doing talks Friday, Saturday, and Sunday on all aspects of the paranormal. Plus, I'll be hosting some of the celebrity presentations. I'll be with the cast and crew of Constantine, Supernatural, and I'll be hanging out with Superman himself, Dean Cain. So make sure you go check that out right now, wizardworld.com. Come on out and have some fun.